गुड इवनिंग एंड वेलकम टू गना शॉट। गना शॉट में आप सबका स्वागत है। वणकम, जय हिंद एंड प्रणाम। Today evening, we're going to talk about rising tensions and roiling seas and turmoil to our west in this CASA webinar. Over the past 3 to 4 months, the world is boiling, and the world is boiling like we've never, seen it before. If you take a global view of the whole story, step back, you see that conflicts in Ukraine, West Asia is in conflict. You look at Africa, the dotted circle is also known as the coup zone or the Sahel portion of the Africa. It's recorded some innumerable number of coups over the past 1 year. Look further east, South China Sea tensions between Philippines and China, and the problems between China and Taiwan are a flashpoint. Just next to us, east and west of us, the AFPAC region has its own problems, and Myanmar is burning. And in the middle of all this, India is rising and sitting quietly, seemingly snugly, but it is not so. West Asia is in real fire. So let's look at West Asia, which is the subject of our discussion today. The Israel versus Hamas versus Hezbollah and Syria. That compact is on fire from 7th of October. And when that happened, the world didn't know what hit us. Then it spread down to the US versus Houthi spat over the Red Sea and the shipping lanes there. That has put a lot of things at risk, and I'll just highlight it a minute later. Of course, last but not the least, Iran has taken off on Iraq, Syria, and Pakistan with missile attacks and a tit-for-tat attack between Pakistan and Iran. Notwithstanding all this, Iran-backed militias have been creating problems all over, and there's a huge thought that Iran holds a lot of cards in this crisis. With all this happening, India can't keep quiet. We have our own problems. Our shipping lanes are at risk. Our trade lanes are at risk. The IMEC, which was the centerpiece of G20, is also at risk, and so is our relations with many more. And forgetting the fact that China is also around in this area, and Russia too. More importantly, you look at it, your primary global maritime checkpoints are also at risk. Why? The Red Sea Suez Canal Compact, which is in the center, we've seen because of the Houthi action, sea lanes being disrupted. Go further to the west, the Panama Canal, where there's very less water these days, has already started a inefficient but alternate land bridge for want of anything else to do. This puts all our supply chains at risk. So not only is there action going around in West Asia, but our global supply chains are at risk, and much more. I don't want to take this argument further. I'd like our revered panelists to come out with their views. I request each of you to put forth your views in about 5 to 6 minutes on what you feel is the evolving situation in West Asia and in the North Arabian, Red Sea, and the Gulf. Admiral Chopra, sir, with your experience of the Eastern and the Western naval commands, right? I'm sure you have a greater viewpoint or a larger viewpoint to put across. Over to you.
Thank you, General, and a very good evening to all of you out there in the ether. We are indeed addressing a very vast canvas this evening, and it's somewhat difficult and a challenge to put out some cogent thought in a few minutes. But let's try and give it a shot. The region to India's west is perhaps the most complex and conflicted in the entire globe. And we have a number of interests and thoughts there, but there are contradictions as spelled out, many histories, many geographies, many conflicts. Now, the Arabs and Jews who have been resident in this area for thousands of years, they've seen it all, from the Babylonians to the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Turks, the Mongols, the Christian Crusaders, and of course, lately the Europeans, the Brits, the Americans, and the Russians. So, my first point is this is not a conflict which was unexpected, and this is not a conflict which is going to resolve in a hurry. My first point is that we can at best look for containment and not resolution, despite the impatience of 21st century geopoliticians and thinks that this can be resolved in some terrific way. The maritime geography, which we have been addressing as part of this region, it contains, as you all know, the three very major straits and choke points of the world's oceans. But the Bab el Mandeb is not only critical for oil flow, but also for east-west trade in a still globalized world. And Hormuz is always under hostage to the Iranians. So the conflict impacts on world trade, world economy, world global. And I think people are jumping to conclusions as to why the Red Sea has come into play. Is it part of the larger conflict between Hamas and Palestine? Is it something separate? But again, I said, what I can do is again flag a few points. You know, despite the history of because of it, uh, there are many conflicts going on here, internecine, Sunni versus Shia. You know all of them. Saudi versus Iran, Muslim versus Jew, Arab versus Palestine, etc. But in my view, the real conflict which is going on in West Asia is between the forces of modernity and the forces of medievalism. And I have no hesitation in saying this out loud. There are two factions in West Asia, one represented by the new Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and some other states like Oman, which represent the possible future, the possible modern future for the region, and the forces of, call it what you want, medievalism, fundamentalism, which are centered around Iran and its proxies in the region. Now, we can all justify whose fault is it, but the fact is that there is this underlying struggle going on in the Middle East, or West Asia, if you want to call it. And I think this present conflict has had its roots possibly decided by the Ayatollah, because time was running out. Time was also opportune before a possible Trump comeback. A fairly weak or perceived weak US administration, distracted by Ukraine and West Pacific, and also before Saudi and Israel got into a pact under the Abraham Accords or something similar. Something had to be done. Now it's like a whodunit, but there is always somebody who done it. We can all infer what we wish. In my view, I call it the forces of medievalism, without trying to name a specific country or regime. And that is, I think, the struggle which led to this first attack on Israel. This is not to condone Israel, it's not to condone what's been happening in the West Bank, it's not to condone other stuff. But I think the core of this particular conflict was to get it going before it could not begin at all within the next year or so, as things resolve themselves in different ways. Consequently, I think the resolution or any such resolution or is not feasible. A containment would be possible, which I think is playing out before our eyes, by limiting the attack abilities of the Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthis, and by trying to rein in the Ayatollahs if possible. behind the scenes or otherwise. Now, obviously, diplomacy cannot say this out loud, but we do have a very big stake in stability in the region, not just for energy security. We had a trucker strike a couple month ago, and people went like millions to the gas pumps to fill in their cars, leading to total chaos. Imagine if the oil flow from West Asia to India were to stop, including our strategic reserves. So there is a issue here which most people put in the background, but energy security remains our most fundamental civilizational, economy-based issue, and we can't afford instability. Forget anything else. We've been fortunate that there's been a sort of CMF here in this area for the last 10, 15 years, which has been doing some policing against non-state actors like pirates and terrorism, like. But that may also go, and I have many things to say, but time is limited. The situation is further complicated because of a four-way struggle for Muslim leadership between Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia. As I said, there are layers and layers here. None of us can fully grasp the layers, but there are no packed solutions. At best, there are containments, and I think the immediate issue is to contain this problem by pressing on the Israelis to take it easy and by taking charge of the Houthis and the Hezbollahs and the Hamas to the degree possible. Taking charge means not necessarily militarily, but also diplomatically. Now, given my pedigree, let me talk a word about the roiling sea, as you put it. Oceans, even if I say so, still remain at the heart of the international order. It's 75% of this planet, ownerless, and whoever to access if they have the capability and the state and non-state. To the heart of the power struggle in the world to come, and not just for its resources, but it is the only highway which is free. It doesn't belong to anyone. So the warships in the Red Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean, as we keep saying, are not as vulnerable as many would think them to be, but they are not invulnerable. And it will take only one missile hit on a US warship to change the narrative and the perspective globally in media flashes around the world. So the game is open, and the Houthis are just trying to get one shot through. And I can imagine the chaps on those ships who can't afford to let one shot through. But uh, it's not easy for the Houthis, even if armed with considerable number of missiles, to actually get anywhere near well-defended fleet. Before I end, you know, I just wanted to my views on what I think are the real impact on US, China, and India. China, as you can notice, is not to be seen, neither militarily and not even diplomatically in any emphatic way. It's lying low, which is the normal way. And in my view, it's pressing Iran because of one person who can't take instability even more than India as China. And any sort of drawing of Iran into this conflict would involve Hormuz and then it would involve Chinese oil. So I think China, behind the scenes, would be pressing the Iranian leadership. And as I've been arguing earlier, China just does not have the bases or the allies in the Indian Ocean to do something really now. And yet, it needs the Indian Ocean as a launch pad for any global great power status. Can you imagine? The Chinese can't do anything only in the Pacific. To be counted, they have to be able to access the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, and it can only be through the Indian Ocean. But that's a separate story. As far as US is concerned, it is energy independent of the Gulf, of West Asia. It's becoming isolationist, it's losing interest. And people say it's internally polarized and preoccupied, but I think the US will remain engaged because the US has a stake in the global economy, not just in its own. Its own economy can only do well if there's a global economy, which includes Japan, China, India, Korea, all doing well as far as the economic. And last but not least, India, all our interests are known from energy to diaspora. I don't know, and I raised it sometime. I don't know whether we've got a thing clear about
You have to
Iran.
come closer to the mic, sir.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, better.
Sorry, did I miss out quite a bit of what I said? I
No,
don't know
you
what
didn't
my
miss out,
sound was
but
like. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I said, as the ambassador put it, we've done a great job diplomatically. But we have to be a little more clearer now about two things, in my view. One is about the balance between strategic autonomy and constant hedging. Strategic hedging is not only being done by India, it's being done globally. Everyone is hedging. No one can be sure what's going to happen. But we are doing it quite a bit. And at what stage does hedging become negative is something which we need to think about. And India also has to be very clear about military capabilities when diplomacy fails or when push comes to shove. And that includes the whole gamut of what we have talked in CASA and elsewhere, from defense budgets to R&D, etc. And I'll sign off by saying the Indian Navy, of course, to which I belonged, has done a fairly good job given its force level constraints and managed to keep the peace in the North Arabian Sea, including drone attacks and piracy attempts, and is in a position of experience and capability, and hopefully will get a little bit more attention as we become a greater power. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'll come back on the role of Indian Navy and India in this maritime construct a little later, because that was going to be my part of the next round, because we can't let it go. Right. You made a few important points. And I think the most important and the basic point, because many times we miss the basic points, is that in this entire story, which has many layers, there's no solution. It's only containment. The challenge is containment. And at this point of time, I don't think all of us put together, big powers, small powers, middle powers, call it what you are, we are able to contain this challenge the way it is supposed to be contained. Can you even wind the clock back till around October 7th for relative peace despite conflict is a question mark. Then the issue of modernism versus medieval thinking. It has got many layers, but I think this is a fact and this is a reality with which we have to live with. And the third point, which you made, but I am quite convinced and I've always been convinced about it, is that China is not so significant in global affairs as we have thought it out so far. And this has been amply clear in its elections, which it lost in Taiwan, because I feel the Taiwan elections were China's to lose, not for the Taiwanese president to win. And or influence events in the Middle East and West Asia on which it is hugely energy dependent. I'll now turn to what Admiral Chopra was saying about this, no one owns the sea, but someone owns the land, and the sea is between the land in many places. And these constricted places, the three, Red Sea, Suez, and the Strait of Hormuz, a lot of land, very little of sea in between, very important to the world. And here we have India as a power which feels it's going to be the net security provider in this area. And if I may dare say, the old thought process of the Indo-Pacific construct, which confined itself to the lake called South China Sea, has shifted to North Arabian Sea and the Red Sea as never before. Do you see a new paradigm shifting coming up here, sir? And what do you see India's role in this? Will we step up to the game? And if we have to, what do we have to do? Admiral Chopra, sir.
Thank you. First, let me answer the ambassador about Pakistan. The human beings and nations are both delusional quite often. So I think when I said Pakistan, I meant these are the countries which have either delusions or ambitions of being a Muslim leader. Anyways, Certainly, the Indo-Pacific, as the India has been saying for very long, starts at the Red Sea and the east coast of Africa, and the Houthis have made this point for us even more clearly than before. Now, in peacetime, actually, the seas serve two purposes. One is, of course, highway and trade. Otherwise, it's a place where people project power. Anybody can go to sea and project power. Warships can come within very short range of land and hang around there for months and then disappear and sending signals all around. So that game carries on, and I don't think that game will change. What is changing is that it's becoming very expensive to maintain large navies and effective navies. It's cheaper to get munitions which could which could threaten navies in restricted waters. Navies are threatened by land only in restricted waters. Now, this is something I want to spend a minute on. Whereas the land can be attacked by navies from 1,000 miles away, as Tomahawk attacks have shown in the past. Now, this equation is not apparent to many except naval professionals because it's not something which comes up daily. But as you saw in this conflict, all these big ships like the USS Eisenhower in the Red Sea, in the Mediterranean, and others are very close to the area of conflict and are operating. And so it will be for any country which has the wherewithal. I think my view is that in the immediate future of the 21st century, there will be only a few countries which will be able to make a geostrategic impact from the sea. I hope we are one of them. US and China most certainly will. Nobody else is clear about any place on the table yet. But if there is a contender, it is us, depending on budgeting and a maritime sort of realization within the country. So once you have a powerful naval force, as is being displayed now, you can do many things. One of the things that the Americans have managed to do a bit is to divert attention from Gaza, in a way, by luring the Houthis. And the Houthis also have given them a chance now to attack Yemen as self-defense, as they call it. So these plays will continue. I think we will up the game. I think there's enough realization in our politicians, our diplomats, and in the security community that unless we up the Navy game, we'll remain a very local power. That realization is intellectual. When it comes to money, then everyone starts fighting. But that's okay. That's part of the game. But I think, at least I can see, almost a decade after leaving the Navy, that there is a broad realization that if we are to count as any sort of significant power, we have to have the wherewithal to deploy at least from the Red Sea to Malacca, if not beyond. So I think that game will be upped in a direct answer to your question. I think now Israel is taking on Hamas. The Americans are taking on the Houthis. And the Hezbollah is lying low, as you might have noticed in the last couple of weeks. So from where I started, I think that's how the containment will continue. As far as Israel is concerned, does anyone seriously think what the ICJ says is going to matter to Israel or anywhere else? Do you really think the Israeli settlers are going to leave the West Bank? I am all for a two-nation solution, but it has to be realistic. I can't think of a two-nation solution which includes the West Bank. I can think of a two-nation solution which includes Gaza and southern parts of Israel into a separate Palestinian territory. But otherwise, it's just all this other thing, protests in universities and on the streets and in the parliaments and in the ICJs is not going to deter somebody who's made up their mind to finish off Hamas as a future threat. And the Israelis, whether you agree with them or not, and think of them as good or bad, they're going about finishing of Hamas for the foreseeable future. And I think the same is going to happen to the Houthis. And in a way, this whole conflict, which may or may not have been started from Tehran, is going to work against these proxies for sure. And I think they will be policing this Operation Prosperity Guardian. As you saw the CMF earlier, these are now, in a way, coalitions of the willing. Whether we join the coalition or not is a political and diplomatic question. We have joined the CMF, as most of you would know, as an observer in some sort of capacity, but we're not happy with it. We're not. It doesn't rest easy on us. And I don't see us joining a coalition, but I still see us upping the game by deploying a little bit more in areas of conflict to the degree possible with the force levels that we have. That's about all I can say for now, I think.
Thank you, sir. Now, I mean, the thing which I got from you and uh, and from the ambassador about your talk on Pakistan, your exchange of views on Pakistan, I'll take it to another level. We always talk in India of a 2.5 front, two and a half front. One front being China, the second front being Pakistan, and half an internal front. Now, this was valid in my thinking, and I've been articulating this with quite a few people over the past 15, 20 days. This was quite valid, this two and a half front construct as we think. Say, probably about 10 years back, 12 years back. Slowly, this has morphed. In today's circumstance, the one front, northern front is intact and it's grown tougher. The Pakistan front, as we understand it as a front, second front, has got diluted, whether we like it or not. Unless we are emotionally attached to Pakistan, being the devil with two horns. The half a front has also got diluted. If you've gone all over the world telling people that look, we've held the G20 in Kashmir and today Kashmir talks of Sare Jahan se acha, right? That half a front has got diluted. Same as the case in the Northeast. So is there a case for us to reformulate this two and a half front to include a maritime front for West? Because like you said, whether you like look at it from the sea to the land or land to the sea, these three choke points, I'll get back, sir, are critical to us. And you have another problem coming to the south in Lakshadweep. If you look at it, I think we need to look at this two and a half front which we are confronting in a different manner. These are initial thoughts. I might say I'm totally out of whack. That's okay, but I don't think so. It's being played out, and I'll definitely hold more thought processes on this in this channel. But since you raised your finger, sir,
Yeah,
all
yeah.
yours.
I think I just have to come in and say
Yeah, please.
that, can you hear me actually? Can you
Yes,
hear
sir, we
me?
can. Yeah, we can.
There are no maritime fronts, just like there are no maritime borders. Navies don't defend maritime borders. This is a big, misconception most people have. Ships are not static at any point. They are mobile, offensive, maneuverable platforms which can move from one ocean to the other in a couple of days. They don't fight at fronts and they don't fight defending borders. But this is so different from the other two services in a way that it's difficult to perhaps grasp unless you go into a discussion on it. And my only point is that if you have the requisite hardware and requisite warships, they can be used in the east, in the west, and south as the situation develops. And they can move very fast, 600 miles in a day.
Yeah, I
And
see your
so
point.
the front is, you don't need a western maritime front or an
No,
eastern.
no. So the point I'm trying to make is that old formulation of two and a half front, needs a rethink,
Yeah, sure, I
a
agree with you.
rethought.
Yeah.
You call it a maritime front, or call it a maritime area, or call it a maritime expanse, right?
So,
But it is something. And when we talk of being net security providers in this area, you definitely expect some issues in some parts of the ocean, not everywhere. So to that extent, we need a rethink. That's the point, the larger point I was trying to
yeah,
make. Admiral Sir, his question is Houthis or not. It's imperative to spruce up naval capabilities to become a truly global power and to become a net security provider in IOR. He's echoing what you had said earlier. However, we also need to modernize our army, IAF, and how do you balance it?
I think given India's situation on its continental borders, it would be foolhardy to neglect the Army or Air Force just for maritime power. So, where we are situated, we have continental concerns, and the Air Force and the Army will have to be strengthened to provide adequate deterrence on these borders. Navies, they say, and history has shown, can only be consequential navies can only be afforded by strong economic powers. And as India's economy strengthens, which we have seen it doing, I think there is more than adequate funding which can be made available should the powers that be decide that the maritime strength of India needs augmentation without any dilution of our cross-border deterrence or Army and Air Force capabilities. I don't think it's a zero-sum game at all. And unfortunately, in our budget fights between the Army, Navy, and Air Force, we tend to view this as zero-sum games, but they are not. They are
Yes.
normal budget fights happening everywhere in the world. But we must not lose track that this is a different dimension. It's international waters. It is peacetime usage, and there's a different ballgame out there for which we need to augment finances. Thank you.